This is your go-to podcast for the breaking news across the NFL, while breaking down how this might affect your fantasy team's success. Are you ready to be a champ? Then welcome to Fields of Fantasy.
Going on, everybody, it is your boy Johnny B, and welcome back to DFS with Fields of Fantasy. The regular season is over, and with that the playoff season begins, and some DFS action continues through the playoffs. So don't worry, you've got another 4 weeks of DFS action before we have to say goodbye for the best part of 6 to 8 months. But with that, we also get a lovely variety of games over on our DFS platform of choice, Fanteam. Not only have they brought you those single game slates that they've always done, they've also got you a Sunday slate, which they've always done, but also they've brought in a weekend slate, which we're going to go through on the podcast today. Although, disclaimer, if you think Dowie's team's all from the Sunday, it's because Dowie's picked pretty much everyone from the Sunday, thinking we were doing the Sunday game. But no worries, it don't matter, does it, Dowie?
No,
and,
I can go through the players from the weekend slate. I've got that up, so my error.
But we'll be fine, won't we?
Well, you know what? It might be ballsy leaving all your players for Sunday, but you might see my mid-charge at the end of it.
Yeah, you might be the person that flies through because everyone else has gone early. None of the games have popped off in the first games. But that is what it is. And of course, one other thing we should mention is also the playoff game, which is the whole of the playoffs, the full weekend, every single weekend. You pick a team and you can make a number of transfers between each playoff game. You also get a wild card. So if you need to make more than 3 transfers, you can change. You can pick your wild card 1 week. You can make as many transfers as you like. So you need to be tactical and whereabouts you want to use that as well. And it's a £10 buy-in, which isn't too bad I don't think, for like a game that's going to go on for 4 weeks. I mean, where else can you have 4 weeks worth of fun for 10 quid? I don't think you can, and have a chance to win money. £5,000 is the guaranteed, but hopefully that'll go a bit higher as well. 18 plus, begambleaware.org. Lots of DFS action. Dowie, are you excited for the playoffs?
I'm really excited, but before we get into this week's, let's give a shout out to last week's winners in the regular season. So, in the £2 competition, Andre 1966 won. He got £211. He also come 4th, 5th, 6th and 9th. So he had 5 entries in the top 10. In the £12 competition, Andre 1966 also won. He come 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th and 8th. He won a lot of money in that. In the £75 competition, he never won. Leeds United won. They got 896. But guess what? Andre comes 2nd and 3rd.
I'd love to know some maths on his profit for this week. That sounds mental.
Well, I've had a rough thing, and it's over £2,000 easy. Could be a lot more, but I've definitely seen it's over £2,000.
Fair play. He's had a very, very good week. Or one he'll probably remember for a while. You don't get a week like that very often on Fanteam.
I'd probably call it a day there, or we'll do all that money.
Double down. Let's go again. Go again.
So, looking at this week's action.
Yeah.
Looking at the points total on the Vegas line, Washington, Tampa, top it, 50.5. Which, I will admit, that's the game I like. Vikings and Rams, 47.5. Bills and Broncos, 47.5. Green Bay Eagles, 45.5. Steelers Ravens, 43.5. And Chargers Texans, 42.5. So, I like the Washington Tampa game. Vikings Rams, I actually wouldn't be shocked to see it high scoring. Bills Broncos, not so much. I'd probably take the under on that.
Yeah.
Green Bay and Eagles will be interesting because Jalen Hurts is in concussion protocol still. Unless something's broke today, but it was yesterday. Steelers, Ravens, 43 points. That's about where I see it. In Chargers, Texans, I think that could be a sneaky one to go over.
I think it could be as well.
I actually quite like that matchup, but if we go on based on the season, it's about right. But in Wildcard weekend, well, things happen.
They do. You're going to get some shocks along the way somewhere. But it's going to be interesting because you definitely have to really think about how you see these games going this week and how you're going to build your teams. And as there's only, 8 teams across, no, it's not, it's 12, isn't it? 12 teams across the weekend to pick from. You get a limited amount of player pool to pick from. It makes it a little bit harder to pick your teams because trying to have the point where because it's really hard sometimes where you get to the point and you're leaving like 3 million in the kitty. Like I got to that load selecting teams this week. Sometimes you just have to do it, I think, because if you play around too much, you end up second guessing what you're doing. But it makes it a lot more difficult. And you definitely have to think about what you see the game plans are going to be in the game, and write stories within your team of how those games are going to go. Just complement the different stories in each game together to make one decent team, or loads of decent teams if you do multi entries. So we've both this week, rather than, because it's a smaller slate, Dowie went ahead. He picked his team as he normally would. Normally he picks a player in each position. He's picked a whole team this week. And normally I'd come back with a load of picks that I like and we discuss others. But this week we've both picked a team, and we're just going to go position by position, say if we've picked in our team for that position, and then just talk about any of the other people that we kind of like on the slate.
Well,
So
I'll have
Dowie,
lots to like because I only looked at the Sunday slate. So.
exactly. So you're like a lot of people that's elsewhere.
But
Quarterback,
yes,
then, what you thinking?
well, I believe, even though I've only looked at the Sunday slate, this is where I would have gone in a way. Jaden Daniels, 20.9 million. This is a game I see being the highest scoring.
Mm.
They're two very good offensive teams. And Tampa's defense has leaked points this season. It hasn't been great. I think Washington under Daniels and Cliff Kingsbury has been a very good offense. So when I was looking at my QBs, I was looking at Daniels or Baker.
Yeah.
I just prefer Washington's offense and defense over Tampa's. And you also get that rushing upside with Daniels. When they met earlier on in the season, Tampa did win, but Jaden Daniels did rush for 2 touchdowns.
I mean, if you look over the regular season, I think Tampa are the worst team in playoffs against QBs. They're ranked 5 in the whole of the 5 worst across the whole of the NFL for points against QBs, 22.3. And you've got to think that a player like Jaden Daniels, particularly, could be the guy that could do well there. They've also actually conceded 6 rushing touchdowns to QBs this season, which I believe is second joint. The only team that's been worse to QBs has been the Cowboys. So it really does suit them. It suits Daniels, I think, in the red zone, getting a couple of TDs with his legs. So I can actually see him doing very, very well. And I think he's going to be, I think he should be the highest owned QB. Whether or not he will be is a different matter altogether. Because the only other teams that are kind of in the bottom half of the points per game against QBs is the Ravens, which is then, you're going to go and pick Wilson, or then you go and pick against the Texans, you then go and pick the Chargers QB, which is Herbert. And I might have some little shares in Herbert. But that Ravens game, I could see quite easily being a bit of a slog and not a very high scoring game for QBs.
I agree. I look at the list. Josh Allen, most expensive. Denver are pretty good in defense. I think Allen has a good game and scores well, but he's got a tougher matchup. Lamar Jackson, I quite like Steelers defense. I think Jackson again has a good game, but he's got a tougher game than Daniels. I go Daniels over Mayfield, but I would get the argument to have Mayfield. I probably will have a couple of lineups with Mayfield.
Mhm.
Jalen Hurts is in concussion. The second highest game is Minnesota v Rams. So, do you like Darnold and Stafford?
Well, I'd guess what? I've picked one of them. Which one have I picked?
Stafford.
Absolutely. I've picked Stafford. I think Stafford has the capability in his locker to have a good game. He can also have an absolute stinker. But I do think at his price point of 14.6 million, I'm saving 6 million on QBs compared to going to a Jane Daniels. I mean, Jane Daniels could get 20 points more than Stafford, so then it pays it off. But I do think he's capable of a 20-point plus Stafford. And when I go through the rest of my team, because I've gone him, I feel like I've got a cheap stack with a absolute stud wide receiver, and then I really think I've enabled the rest of my team to be pretty competitive.
I really like it. I would say now, looking at it, Daniels will be my go-to. Stafford will be in my other lineups
Okay, so
because
interesting.
I do think Daniels will probably outscore Stafford.
Yeah,
But does he outscore him at price? You know, he might beat him by 2, 3 points. So realistically, saving that 6 million to get a stud elsewhere would be better.
I think so, and I think some wide receivers can outscore the QB. So then,
Yeah.
can I get some better studs throughout my wide receivers because of it? And that's kind of like how I've built my team.
Yeah, and I do think any other QB really. I think I might have a little dabble in Herbert somewhere.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the other person I like. I think the Texans are a match we can attack with an offense.
And what do you
And
think about?
I do think Herbert's played better recently. He scored a bit better, and I do think there's a very good connection with some of his younger wide receivers at the moment. And I think that's where they'll do well, particularly. Well, Dobbins is a maybe. So if he doesn't play, I think the wide receivers have got to turn up a bit more because I don't think the other running backs at the Chargers will have anywhere near as good of an impact as Dobbins would.
All right, let's go to running back.
Cool. You
So
start.
I am gonna go with Bucky Irving.
Absolutely. I've gone that as well.
You know, he's had 17 plus touches in every game since week 12. And since week 10, he's averaged 21 points per game. Commanders' run D is below average. I don't think you can ignore Bucky Irving.
Mm.
As my cheap, I've got a bit of a cheap option as well. McGoughlin, 8.8 Broncos.
Buckling, yeah.
So he's starting to take over the backfield now. Last week, he had 18 touches to Williams' 8. I think he's a cheap option. Bills D have given up fourth most points to running backs. So I think he's a choice you could have and save money. Do I expect him to go massive? No, but I think he outpays his value and allows you to spend elsewhere. So that's what I like there.
Yeah. I'm not the most confident in the Broncos running backs, and that's why I probably haven't picked him myself. But I probably might have some shares here and there just to enable me to spend money elsewhere. Because I did struggle finding other cheaper choices across most of the other positions. But you're right. I think as long as he gets that volume, he should have the opportunity to score well in terms of yardage against Buffalo. I'm just seeing if anybody else has conceded it. Yeah. So the most running yards a running back has, well, rushing yards a running back has had on average per game is against the Bills this season, 750 yards. So I think there's definitely ample. That's receiving yards actually, but still, the Bills have just been a team you can target with running backs, haven't they, this year? And I do think that, yeah, I'll have a few shares, but not loads because I'm not confident on the ability of the Broncos running back to do well because I think that's been one of their weaker points this season. So yeah, but I mean, Bucky Irving, I think you're absolutely correct. The second worst defense for running backs is Washington, and I do believe it's going to be a high-scoring game. And I think Irving will be a big part of that across, both sides, both rushing and catching the ball. And that's it really. And who have I gone with them? I've gone back to the Minnesota Rams game. He had a week off last week, so he's a bit more fresher. So I believe I want to target the Minnesota with Kieran Williams. If it's going to be a high-scoring game, I think he's going to be involved heavily as well. And I just like his price point at 16.1 million. Because my problem is when I look at the more expensive running backs, you've got, Deza against Pittsburgh. You got Barkley, who's against Green Bay, and I'm not sure I don't want too many shares in them. I think Bucky is definitely a better choice than the two of them just because of price. And then I kind of go, right, I want Williams. But I also like Joe Mixon against the Chargers because I think if the Texans are going to do well, I think the best we've seen Texans play is generally when Mixon has had a very good game. Hasn't had as good second half of the season, but Joe Mixon is a very, very talented running back. Form is temporary, class is permanent, and I think he can definitely bring that back for the playoffs.
It'll be interesting to see, if Hurts doesn't make the team, Barkley value should go up, shouldn't it?
It should do. It should do. Yeah, it should do, unless the offense doesn't stay on the field for very long and he gets a lot less opportunities because of that. But it's an interesting one, I think, with the Eagles.
Running back isn't a great week, is it, this week?
Yeah, to be honest, the Eagles Packers game is the one game I've kind of avoided. It's not just because I'm not sure on it. I'm less confident on that game, so I've not really got much within my team picks in there. So I've avoided it really. Wide receivers though, who have you got?
Do you want me to run through all the four I've got?
Yeah, because we've both got four. So
no, I got three. I got three.
Oh, so you've done a double tight end?
Well, I've had to because I looked at the Sunday slate, so everything was more expensive.
Oh yeah, of course.
So, if I was going Daniel's quarterback, Scary T's obvious choice, isn't it? He's had a great year, 1,096 yards. But you know what's the most impressive thing? 13 touchdowns. Now he's got to be up the top, hasn't he, for touchdowns in the year?
Got to be close, isn't he?
13's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, in a game you see as a shootout, you've got to have the assets from it. Scary T is the number one asset to the Washington. And I think it's one of them, even though they like the run game a lot, I think both teams are going to be throwing the ball. So, Scary T is my wide receiver 1. My wide receiver 2, I took a bit of a gamble in the Bills game. Okay. Mr. Reliable, Shakir. Now, he's someone I always feel like Josh Allen throws a ball to and he catches all the time, doesn't he?
Yep.
Bills wide receivers for me are quite... We never really pick them, do we? Because you never know who's going to get the main volume. But I think in a game like this, Shakir is going to be the one he goes to, just for the reliability, and he doesn't really drop, does
he? I haven't looked at the stats, but I'd be surprised if he's not one of the highest in the league for catch percentage.
And then I've also targeted that game Courtland Sutton.
So you're going double?
Going double because, you know how I see that game? I see the Bills taking a decent lead on Bronco. In these games, you got to go for it, haven't you? It's shit or bust, basically.
Mm.
And Bo Nix has been very good this year, and he loves Courtland Sutton. Courtland Sutton, he's had over 1,000 yards and I think 8 or 9 touchdowns. I feel like every time I watch Red Zone, it's Bo Nix to Courtland Sutton. I just like that in my head, I see the game as Broncos are going to have to throw, so he's going to get the targets. So that's my three wide receivers: Sutton, Shakir, and Scary T.
Okay. So I have one of those. So I went with Scary Terry. I think he's going to be the highest, if not one of the highest owned on the slate, isn't he? Do you agree? I think
I
it's
think
got to
so.
be. I've noticed you haven't gone Evans.
I couldn't afford him in that Sunday lineup, to be honest.
I didn't go Evans either, but I did go with McMillan because, as we were talking, we see that as a high scoring slate. I still want to have some type of pass catcher within this lineup because I want him to go back and forth. That'll put Scary Terry's points hopefully higher up. So then hopefully McMillan will get a nice bit of involvement as well and pay off that 30 million price. And he's been particularly great over the last few weeks and the last part of the regular season. So I think at 13 million, that's a nice price. I also then went with your main man, Puck and a Cow. 18.8 million is the second most expensive on the slate, but I do feel he's quite reliable, isn't he?
He's
And I
good.
think he has the ceiling to go off. And I just have a feeling. I mean, we've spoke via WhatsApp. We were meshing a couple of Riku and Az have both been on the pod before, and I was saying this is the game where I think people will see the Rams as the underdog, and I think it's the game on the slate where I see it's most likely that the underdog wins. And I really do fancy the Rams. I do think Sean McVay, with the Matt Stafford playoff experience, Super Bowl winning experience, can get you to kind of get through these games. Whereas I think Minnesota don't have that as much. So it is the one I'm going to pick, and I just think he's just a safe choice. And you don't have to spend too much money. You haven't got the 20 plus millions like Jamar Chase on this slate because they didn't make the playoffs. So I think, I do like that combination of the Cow, McMillan, and Scary Terry because I think out of three, I think their ceilings can be particularly high. And then I kind of had 23, 24 million ish. 24.1 million I had left. I needed a wide receiver or another skill position. I needed a tight end. I won't go on to my tight end yet, but my other wide receiver, Jordan Addison, at 14.3 million. We've seen what he's been capable of. I mean, that one game where he got, was it like 3 touchdowns or something like that? He went up for 40 points. I think he hasn't got over 20 points since. But again, I do feel if we do see this as high scoring, I would then hopefully expect that Jordan Addison would have some decent involvement in that.
Yeah, I really like the Jordan Addison. He's someone looking at this slate at the price I'd go for. And you know what other thing? Two wide receivers would tempt me in this weekend slate.
Mm-hmm.
Nico Collins.
Yeah.
And Lad McConkey.
Yeah.
If you're looking at that game, what could be a sneaky game, what goes high? I think they're both quite well priced, personally, and we know they're both the go-to weapons. So, in the weekend slate, I wouldn't be against using them as a little double game.
Well, I haven't got any of that though. That's the only game I think. Is it the only game? It's definitely one or two of the only games that I don't have any players in this team. I know you only picked for the Sunday. Would you have put any of them in, do you think, in your team?
Yes.
Okay.
I definitely would have, yes.
Yeah, okay. So that's my question, because I was starting to think, well, if you wouldn't have done either, then would have they been the sneaky play of the week where actually they're going to be slightly ignored compared to some of the earlier games?
Oh yeah. We're on to tight ends now, aren't we?
Yep, your favourite position.
So obviously I only looked at the Sunday slate. Prices are particularly a bit higher. So I actually go double tight end because I didn't have enough money to get any skill player, like the big skill players.
Yeah,
I was out of cash. So, I had Dallas Goddard.
yeah,
Now, it was his first game back after the layoff. He had 4 targets for 55 yards. Now, what filled me with confidence is they didn't have to play him, but they did to get him the reps.
yeah,
So, I think he'll see more usage. We know before his injury, he was one of them, he could have them real high weeks. AJ Brown's a maybe. I'm not too sure what his knock is, but will that also limit him? So I like Dallas Goddard, and I haven't actually got any players from that matchup, so I'd like to cover myself, like in case it does go off.
yeah,
That was my thought behind that. And then my other tight end, it may have changed because of his injury status, but you said you were shocked I never had Evans or even McMillan.
yeah.
I went with K. Dotton.
Okay, interesting.
So we know K. Dotton, when fit, Baker loves, doesn't he?
Yes.
Now, it'll be interesting to see his usage because McMillan's kind of broke through, hasn't he? But
Yeah,
when Evans was injured, K. Dotton was the guy.
but it was wide receiver one for a while. K. Dotton was.
Yeah, so I'll be interested to see his usage. Now, McMillan's kind of breaking through. But in a game, what you think is going to have a shootout, you've got to have a player from the other team. So for me, K. Dotton would have been my bring. He's my bring back on the Sunday slate. He's 8.2 million. So he's pretty good. So if you look at the Sunday slate, K Dotton's 8.2, Goddard's 9.8. The wide receivers, there ain't much choice, in that price range.
Yeah, and this is the thing you have to think about with Otton as well. Actually, is he is a maybe at the moment. Um, they were saying he was trending in the right direction, but that doesn't mean they were 100% confident that he was going to play. And the other point is, because of that, you could end up picking Otton as your tight end. And by the time you get to the game, he's ruled out. And then who's your backup tight? Who's the backup Bucks tight end in the on the slate?
They've got on the slate, they've got it as, I can't even see who it is.
This is my point. I don't even know if they've got one. So you could have, because there's only Otton on the slate as a tight end.
Mm.
If he doesn't play, you're getting a big fat zero because there's no other Tampa tight end on the slate. Whereas if you picked, say, I know Goddard's playing and he wasn't playing, well, Calcaterra's on the slate, so at least you've got that safety blanket there for Goddard compared to Otton. I don't know if there's any other questionable tight ends on the slate that start, but I think that's it.
I'm
But
sure
that is what you
Fantine
have
will
to think.
sort that closer to
Yeah.
the data.
Well, hopefully, but you have to think about things like that, especially on a weekend slate where you can't do substitutions yourself. You can't change people. It's not like DraftKings where you can change people mid slate. You can't here, so you can't bring someone else in. So just you've got to be a little bit careful with Otton. But if he does get past, he might be a sneaky play because that'll put a lot of people off. So actually, you get him in your team and he does play, all of a sudden you've got a little bit of a differential. And if he does well, it's going to push you up the leaderboard quite a lot. The tight end I picked, I had exactly 9.8 million. I spent all my money on this team. I picked Goddard. As you, I want to get. I thought, do I need to put at least one asset in the slate? I did say it's one of the ones that I was least confident on. But we talk about the fact that Hurts might not even start because he's still in concussion protocol. With Kenny Pickett comes in, he's got a nice safety blanket go to Goddard. As you said, will Brown even start, etc., etc., etc. And I do think he looked good last week with Kenny Pickett. I thought he looked particularly good. And if he increases his volume slightly, gets a touchdown, I think at 9.8 million, he's the potential to get towards the 20s if he's used enough. So I do like him. And I was just kind of looking, who else do I really like? Again, I'm not confident on the Baltimore Steelers game, so I ignored Andrews, even though I think Andrews could probably be the high. We know he could be the highest scoring tight end on the slate, but I can't be confident on it. I mean, Ertz is your alternative if you haven't got Scary Terry, I think, or you can play both really. But if you want to asset in there and you want to go away from Scary Terry because he's going to be so highly owned, you could go for Ertz at a lower owner percentage and be a bit different. And then you get into your Schultz, who I think is again a sneaky one because of the Chargers Houston game, where that could be a lot more high scoring than we actually get from Vegas. And then Hockenson, maybe, although I haven't been confident enough in Hawkinson's volume and usage since he's been back this season to want to pick him at 10 mil. I think that's a bit steep for a guy that's form is 7.6 when everybody around him is, 9s to 12s plus Andrews at 15. So that's the one. Well, that's probably the one tight end I want to avoid.
Yeah, I would agree with that. DSTs.
But this will be interesting. Who do you reckon I've gone with? I'll let you guess who I've gone with.
I reckon you have gone with the Ravens.
Incorrect.
The Bills.
Incorrect.
So we've gone different.
You have. I've gone the absolute cheapest DST on the slate because they are the best TST in football this season, which is the Broncos. I think everybody's got this MVP view on Josh Allen this season. And I think a lot of people think the Bills should just win that. I think it's highly disrespectful to the Broncos. This is coming from a Bills fan, by the way, if you haven't listened before. And actually, I think this could be a very, very tight game, very low scoring. And I think in that scenario, I do fancy the Broncos.
Interesting, because I never went with the Broncos, but I looked at them and I liked them. But my two choices would be I've gone with the Bills because obviously I've gone with the Sunday slate.
Yeah.
And that's just because I believe Bills will have a lead and it will force Denver to throw the ball. That's where the mistakes can happen. It'll be a lot of pressure for Bo Nix in his first playoff as well, won't it?
It will be, but sometimes pressure makes diamonds.
Yeah. So I do like Bo Nix, so I'm not too concerned, but I think it's just more that they're going to be forced to throw it and bring the points up. So that's my script on why I would have gone with the Bills.
We've literally gone the opposite end of the spectrum for that then, because you've gone the most expensive. I've gone the least expensive in the same game.
There's not actually much difference in comparison, though. It's 2 million.
2 million, isn't it? To be honest, the Broncos, the way I set my team out, it was I can't afford to spend much more money on it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I've had to try and find a saving somewhere. Potentially being running back on Kieran Williams, and then saving some money and potentially then going like a Brian Robinson or something like that, because I think he might be highly owned because he hasn't scored as much points recently. So anyway, continue.
But I do quite like the Ravens because I believe Russ Wilson's the worst quarterback on the slate.
Yeah.
Ravens' form is the second highest. And I'll be honest, I think the Steelers' offense has looked like shit the last few weeks. So we normally target the worst quarterback on the slate. I think it's hard to argue Russ isn't the worst.
It's the worst. It's definitely the QB I'd be less confident in picking.
And then I think the only other one you could look at really is CJ Stroud. He's been pretty poor, hasn't he, this second half of the season?
He has done. That's why I think even if I'm picking assets from that game and I see it's high scoring, I'd rather pick other assets than Stroud.
So
I'm more confident in the others. And Nico Collins could have a good game, but Stroud's had a load of interceptions. One's gone for a touchdown. His points could be crap. He could have
Stroud could throw for 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, but Nico Collins gets over 100 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah.
So Collins can still do well and Strike can be bad. So yeah, I don't think the Chargers is a bad play.
No, I agree. I think Chargers have. I've liked the Chargers. I think it was definitely one of the DSTs we were picking quite a bit near the start of the season.
Mhm.
Um, and I just think matchups have dictated who we've played recently. Well, we haven't used them in the second half as much because they've had the Bengals, the Ravens, the Chiefs, the Bucks, Falcons, and the Broncos. And of course, we like Bo Nix, don't we? So they didn't have the QBs to target like you generally have done. But it's interesting. And going back to Russell Wilson, though, do you feel that he's just not been the same since Pickens had his injury?
Well, I think you could be right because injuries do affect. I don't think CJ Stroud's been the same since that Tank Dell injury either.
No, or Diggs, to be fair.
So yeah, no, you could be completely right, and you have to think the more you get into a season, defenses work out how to
Yeah,
figure offenses out, and Russ hasn't been bad this year. I would say he's actually been, you could say, average to good,
yeah.
but he's still the worst quarterback in this slate, and I think he's regressing, not progressing.
Well, I think yeah. He definitely is regressing. I think we've been saying it for years. I think, haven't we, about Russell Wilson? Yeah.
And
Your joke is that the only thing
he's
your
nearly
joke is
shut us up.
nearly did. He had a couple of good games, didn't he, when he come back? He had a 25 against the Jets of all people, uh, and then 26 against the worst defense probably in the league, or one of them in the Bengals. Um, Apart from that, he hasn't really been that particularly great scoring. He's been sad to consistent weeks, but nothing else over 20 that's been world beaters. But
It's like, what it is, Johnny B. You're the head coach of the Steelers. Next season, are you confident going in with Russ Wilson?
I don't want to go in with either of them. It's the
Well,
truth.
you just
But
answered the question on Russ.
but would do I think it's would do I mind Russell Wilson and having an understudy? It
Well,
depends. Do they want to try and get Super Bowl like a proper playoff ready or not? Because they always are at the playoffs. So how far are they away from actually being fully competitive? Is it a QB? Is it something else?
this is a massive task to beat the Ravens. For me, in the AFC, I wouldn't want to play the Ravens, would you?
I I think. Do you know what? I think out of everybody in the playoffs, they're the one team I wouldn't want to play. And I know everybody rates the Lions more, but I think, if that phrase of any given Sunday, I think there's less Sundays that the Ravens will be beatable than the Lions are. I think there's more Sundays available to beat the Lions than there are the Ravens.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to play the Ravens. So, you know what? If Russ and Tomlin beat the Ravens, that could be one of the biggest wins
Yeah,
of the season, I think.
could be, could be. It'll be a big shock. I think it's
Especially
probably
at
the
an important occasion, because you see some of these big teams get beat in the last few weeks. I never count the last few weeks. 'Cause a lot of teams are resting.
yeah,
This will be the biggest achievement of a win, I think. If I don't see it either, but I think if they do it, that is huge.
yeah. I think you're right. I think it'll be the biggest shock of the weekend.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. Well, that has been our teams for the weekend slate over on Fantasy. Make sure you get involved, and you get the link in the description if you haven't signed up yet. That gives you a £2 free entry without even having to put any money in. So you could even try it on try your £2 free ticket on the Saturday game, and if you're enjoying yourself, then you can go and have a nice bit of play in the Sunday slate. And don't forget as well, you can also get involved in the season game, and you need to get involved in the season game before the playoff starts. So just get in before you miss out, basically. And of course, make sure you are also signing up to the sponsors of the podcast, the JTT Cup, and get yourself into the 2025 league and donate if you can, because the quicker you donate, the quicker you can help some of the poor kids and their families. So without that, we will be back next week for divisional playoff action. And hopefully we'll do well in the wildcards. See you later, Tanner.